From the land of conjurers, flying through the internet to your device like a UAP, hauntingly unexplained and downright weird, this is the Witching Hours, and we are ready to take off in the flash of an eye. Good evening to one and all, wherever and whenever you are listening to our program. I am China the Frost, and joining me as always is Medium Jenny Lee. How are you doing this evening, Medium Jenny Lee?
Well, I spent my day with a bunch of crazy kindergartners. So all now right. That's over. I'm okay.
And now it's thundering and lightning and pouring down rain, and it's just been that kind of
really
day.
Need. Yeah.
I'm thankful because we have had a stretch here in Virginia of dry, hot weather. We've been in the hundreds, multiple days in a row. It has been pretty gross, and it looks like we're supposed to get a little cooling down over the weekend and a lot of rain, which we need.
Everything's dry and dusty.
So
I think I saw tumbleweed today.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll take it. 100%. Okay. So we have some things going on tonight. We have our guests, which we'll talk about in a little while. We have a great show for you tonight. And we also, looks like we lost Brandon there for a second.
Uh-oh. Now my face is huge.
Thank you for this. I'm so serious. Let's see. Are you able to we'll see if we can get Brandon back when we come back on here in a second. And we have Alyson, the priestess of Wonderland, with us once again. It's been a little bit. I think it was last time was July that we did the moon phases, so we wanted to make sure that we got.
I know we missed August.
Alyson to talk about. Yeah, and we're using the guest star thing, and sometimes it works really good, and sometimes it doesn't. But it creates, I don't know. Discord would be perfect, but as we can see, when someone's camera disappears, it goes crazy wacko. So we'll find a better way. Well,
and I got a big old head.
Perfect way. We just haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
But I imagine first things first, let's go ahead and talk about the news.
Yay.
Okay. All right, so to start us off with the news tonight, the first article is, are deep blue seas fading? Oceans turn to new hues across parts of the Earth. Studies find.
Really?
A large swath of Earth's oceans changed color over the past 20 years, and human activity is suspected to have caused it, a new study reports. That deep blue color depicted so richly in postcards is disappearing, particularly in the tropics. On the whole, low-altitude oceans have become greener in the past 20 years. According to the report published in Nature, the color shift was discovered as researchers pored over 2 decades worth of satellite data. They eventually concluded 56% of ocean's surface was greener than it was before the turn of the century. Climate change may be driving the shift. Scientists suspect, however, the trend does not appear to be associated with rising sea surface temperatures. So they're not quite sure what's causing it.
Where is the green coming from?
Yeah. The story goes on to kind of give some hypothesis that it could be different kinds of planktons that are growing because of different temperatures in the ocean and so on and so forth.
Speaking of plankton, me and the little one were just watching SpongeBob.
There you go.
We can blame it on that plankton.
Yeah. So if you go to the Caribbean and the water doesn't look quite as blue, you're not seeing things. That was my favorite thing about living down there, actually. Like just being able to go out in like 75 feet of water and see the sand dollars on the bottom was absolutely magnificent. Article number 2, Pentagon UFO Office unveils official website for U.S. government personnel to report sightings. The Pentagon's official office for addressing UFOs is a new website where U.S. government and military personnel can report their own sightings. The All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, unveiled the new website on Wednesday. According to a new note from the office's director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the website will be used to inform the public about the findings, as well as a way for the public to report sightings of UFOs, as they're now called, the UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. While the site is under construction, it features a section where the office will be accepting reports from current or U.S. government employees, service members, or contractors with direct knowledge of U.S. government programs or activities related to UAPs dating back to 1945. So they're allowing for some old. They are allowing for some old.
There's something before Roswell 47.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting year to pick, isn't it?
Yeah. How specific of them.
And I have removed the logo from in front of.
Oh, now we can see Alyson. Hey.
The priestess's face there. I don't know what I'm thinking. Story number 3 tonight. Many Americans say they've interacted with deceased family members in dreams, study says. More than half of Americans say they have interacted with deceased relatives, according to a study. The Pew Research Center recently surveyed more than 5,000 adults in the United States, and 53% reported ever having been visited by a dead relative in dreams of some other form. 44% said they experienced one of the following in the past year: feeling a dead relative's presence, telling a late family member about their lives, or having a deceased relative communicate with them. Researchers say this survey included responses from Americans of all religious backgrounds, including Christians, Buddhists, Jews, and Muslims. So,
very interesting.
I don't think that surprises anyone on this show.
Nope.
But I thought it was worthwhile to put out there whenever you can get some kind of.
Well, when you add the extra
science
part that they put in there, like it was 50% had a dream about them. Okay. But then you add in that extra part where it's like 43% said that they also felt their presence, et cetera, et cetera. Like,
yeah,
that adds a whole nother layer of awareness, I think.
And they've interacted. I think the thing that caught my attention was that they've interacted with deceased family members in dreams.
Because, most people just think of dreams as they're just dreams anyway. So, yeah.
That was
interesting.
That was probably actually the first time I ever had heard anything like that, which specifically from my grandmother after my grandfather died. She would talk about how he was coming to see her in her dreams. And I was like, hold on, this is my very straightforward,
very religious
no
grandma.
Nonsense, very, yeah. But she was like 100% like, I woke up, we went for a walk around the house, and he was like pointing things out to me, and we stood at the door and had a conversation, and then he left, and I went back and got in bed. So it happens, not just to my grandmother, but evidently like more than 50% of all Americans, which is crazy.
Love it.
Story number 4. DARPA wants to build a thriving commercial economy on the moon in 10 years.
Oh, yeah, we were talking about this. We were talking about the moon McDonald's.
Yeah.
And how nobody's going to want to eat there.
The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA,
that's the first thing they're going to build up there, right? McDonald's.
is seeking rapid development of technologies to support the foundation for an integrated lunar infrastructure. The 10-year lunar architecture, also called Luna 10, capability study will attempt to unite what the agency sees as isolated efforts within the scientific community in order to produce a diverse technological framework to facilitate activities in space around and on the surface of the moon in the coming decades. The DARPA study is scheduled to last 7 months and will include lunar service providers and users, according to a statement on the agency's website published a couple weeks ago. A large paradigm shift is coming in the next 10 years for the lunar economy, Michael Nayak, program manager in DARPA's Strategic Technology Office, said in the statement. To help expedite this shift, Luna 10 will identify companies with technically rigorous business plans and promote collaborative innovation between them to create multiple commercially viable services on the moon by around 2035. As the DARPA statement acknowledges, this timeline coincides with NASA's effort to establish a permanent human presence on the moon as a proving ground for future missions to Mars. NASA's current Artemis program includes eventual plans for a space station and an outpost at the moon's south pole and expeditions across the lunar surface.
Luce has me cracking up about the zero gravity play place with the ball pit. Just imagine the fun that would be.
Everyone's
balls
like,
floating all over the place.
just for the McDonald's playground. Well, mining. I think business really wants into space right now to mine. And being
But I was thinking about that the other day. Like, if they start taking material out of the moon, wouldn't that mess up? Could that possibly mess up the gravitational pull of the moon for us? Because the moon controls all the liquids on the planet. Can we not take a bunch of stuff off the moon? I think that sounds like a bad idea.
I mean, well, first off, from what I've heard and the interviews I've listened to, the big push isn't to really mine the moon, although I'm sure that's something they would do. It is to pull asteroids into orbit, into some kind of outer orbit.
Okay, so they can harvest stuff from the asteroids.
So they can mine the asteroids.
Gotcha.
Because there's all kinds of precious metals in them, So companies want those resources, and the metals they can find just about any metal. I think they want an asteroid. So
that also sounds like a bad idea. We're not good at a lot of things, and just like putting an asteroid in our orbit on purpose.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if we can manage.
And how do you negotiate that between like countries? Because like everything is like very like we're having to create coalitions. But like, what happens when like Italy wants to do this, and we're just like not quite sure, like, hey, what's your guys' space program like? And they're like, oh, we got this. And we're like, I don't know if you do, and I'm not calling Italy. I'm just came up with the country off the top of my head. But, like any country, it's like, oh, well, we accidentally let an asteroid get loose and now it's headed towards,
yes,
the East Coast of the United States. I don't know.
Moon McDonald's got loose. It's on the way.
Off it comes. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, yeah, I'm kind of agree with you.
Man.
And then for the crappiest story that we've had in a while,
disaster pants.
Delta flight makes U-turn over diarrhea incident. This is straight from the headlines. Flight 194 was 2 hours into its journey on Friday evening when the pilot reportedly asked to head back. So, in an audio posted to X, formerly Twitter, he said a passenger had diarrhea all the way through the plane. Now, this plane was headed from Atlanta to Barcelona, so that's a good, decent flight there. The plane was cleaned and flew to Barcelona the next day after return. We've had a passenger who's had diarrhea all the way through the airplane, so they want us to come back to Atlanta, says the audio recording taken from communications with air traffic control. In a statement to the Insider website, Delta confirmed there had been a medical issue on board, which meant the plane had to return to Atlanta to be cleaned. Delta Flight 194 from Atlanta to Barcelona returned to Atlanta following an onboard medical issue. Our teams worked as quickly and safely as possible to thoroughly clean the airplane and get our customers to their final destination. We sincerely apologize to our customers for the delay and inconvenience of their travel plans.
I mean, just imagine.
We've talked a lot on this show. We've had snakes on the plane on this show.
Thanks.
We've had all kinds of different bugs and stuff. Bees on a plane, I think we even had one time.
Now we've had.
And there's pictures. I'm not going to post them on Discord, but if you want to see the pictures, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
I had just listened to one of those Suzanne Spooner hypnosises, and the woman had celiac disease at some point, and she called it disaster pants. Then he tells me the story, and I'm like, it's perfect. Disaster pants.
I don't know.
That was the conversation pants on the disaster plane.
The conversation we were having was, you're already 2 hours into the flight. of like an 11-hour flight or a 9-hour flight or something. Like,
Go ahead.
at that point, do you just say, hey, let's just take a vote as the occupants of this plane and say, let's drive through this and like, let's just get to Barcelona and forget about the nightmare? To have to fly 2 hours back.
Yeah.
To what? Go sleep in the airport lobby to wake up and fly to Barcelona again the next day?
I think that's better than 7 more hours with diarrhea down the whole plane.
Well, that's what happened. So that was the weird news.
Good stories this week.
I had to add that one. I know it was disgusting, people, but it was just. I had a good belly shaking laugh from that one earlier today, but I feel completely horrible for the person because
I know. Not only did they have to go through the experience of crapping themselves through an airplane, then they had to sit on the airplane with the people that saw it happen, and now it's like a headline news story across the whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I might have just gone out an exit door or something after that. Like, yep.
Are we over water? Okay, I'm going out.
Sorry about that, guys. Oh, man. Anyway.
Yikes.
That was the news.
Time for more moon news.
Yes. So, welcome in, Alyson. Hopefully we have your audio. Can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you hear me? I can finally hear you. I just can't hear anybody else.
Yeah, you won't be able to hear anybody else because you're just going through the stream. So welcome, Alyson, Priestess of Wonderland. It's been a little bit since we've been have you on to talk about the moon phases. I think we talked about it July and all this craziness that we have going on now. You were kind of talking about how crazy it was going to be, and now we're here. So what else do we have coming up for moon phases and stuff this month in September?
Well, first I have to say, as a former flight attendant, I would have done the U-turn. I mean,
you would have done the U-turn.
They have their door shut. They're not affected by it at all. So the flight attendants are back in the back with the poop. So.
Yeah. It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. But yeah, so September, I mean, we still have all of the retrogrades happening right now. And without getting into detail about that, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if you include Chiron as a planet and Pluto as a planet, they're all retrograde. But I think the main thing that we should do is focus on Venus and Mars are not retrograde. So Venus is the planet of love and Mars is the planet of action. So we can still be like moving forward with things. We don't have to be hibernating yet. Like we're only just entering into fall with September. And you can like really feel that pull, I think, especially with this moon cycle. Because we just had the big blue Pisces moon last week. So now we're in a waning cycle and it's decreasing. So this is like allowing yourself to slow down, allowing your energy to wane. And we're also entering into fall. So the sun is also waning. So I think we really feel that kind of pull, even though I don't know how hot it was where you guys are, but we had 100-degree days here this week, but it still feels different. Like it still feels like the light is hitting different. The sun is waning. Like you can still kind of feel it, even though it's 100 degrees outside.
Yeah, you can tell the days are getting a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
That would definitely notice that. Jenny has been in a mad rush to start decorating for fall. And I've been like, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm sweating to death. Let's hold off for a second. She's like, well, you start decorating. I heard her yesterday on her stream saying, I want to decorate for Christmas like 2 months early. But at least it's getting cold at that point. Like I can't do fall with 100-degree weather.
Yeah. Well, the problem with not decorating early for fall is that by the time October actually gets here, there's not going to be any fall stuff in the stores. It's going to be all Christmas. So
that's true.
So you can put we can feel that pull towards fall. And then next week we have our new moon in Virgo. So this is when you're going to want to start pulling out your decorations, cleaning out your closets, getting rid of your summer stuff and pulling your fall and winter stuff out, like putting the the garden beds to sleep and like just like getting organized. So Virgo is the sign of organization.
Okay.
And so this is setting new daily routines, like your schedule has shifted, especially if you are a teacher or you have kids that went back to school. Like you're kind of, you've been in it for a little while and now you've kind of got your routine set. And so the Virgo new moon is for like solidifying those things. Like this is my routine and this is I'm sticking to it, and just organizing your life in any way that like works out for you.
Okay, and what week is that? So we can start kind of bringing fall in?
Yeah, that's next week. So
Next week.
September 14th.
September 14th. Okay, so you got 7 days, Jenny, and then you can start orange and browning the house up.
And then we enter Libra season the week following that on the 23rd. And Libra is all about balance. Its symbol is the scales and justice. So this is, you've got your everything organized. Now you're like ready to kind of like even things out a little bit.
Okay.
And then at the end of the month, we have an Aries full moon on the 29th. And that really closes out the month and also kind of closes out, if you remember back in the spring, we had 2 Aries new moons, which were all about activating and starting things and you're at the start line and now we're at the finish line. So the Aries full moon is illuminating all that progress that you've made, everything that you've done since spring. And now that we're in fall, kind of figuring out, okay, how do we want to change things up? What's next? Or just what are we going to do to make it through the rest of the year? And then that's when at the end of the year is when you start winding down and thinking of what's happening next year.
Excellent. So we're kind of have a good place to kind of meld into the winter season.
Yeah.
Unlike what we had kind of in this late winter, we had like a really late hibernation that we talked about previously on the show.
Yeah.
Maybe things move a little quicker into the end of the year this year.
We're still having the retrogrades happening. We're still gonna have like 3 planets retrograde around the new year, and the last one finally goes direct in February. So it's still gonna be a slow start for January, but not as bad as last year, because last year it was Mars was retrograde, Mercury was retrograde, and when the planet of action and the planet of communication is slowing things down, you feel it more because those planets are closer to us, but you feel it more because communication is important, action is important. And so we were feeling really stuck last year. I don't think it's going to feel as stuck. But it's kind of feels like, so with Venus and Mars being direct, this whole month just feels like kind of like you're making your way through the fog, blindfolded and leading with your heart, because Venus is the planet of love. Mars is a planet of action. So don't stop, don't hibernate, and just get reorganized with the Virgo new moon and balance things out with the Libra season.
Well, that sounds good. I think I can handle that. Another week, maybe cooler weather. We transition, we work on the balancing, and we start getting things. Sounds like maybe some house cleaning, like not actual house cleaning, but kind of getting things in order.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Alyson, for coming on, and we'll have you on to talk about more of this as we get closer to. We got a lot of stuff coming up. It's all right around the corner now. Once you get past Labor Day, it's like Halloween and
I feel
Thanksgiving.
Like September is like get ready, because October is going to be here, and then it's the holidays, and
off we go.
It's new.
And off we go.
Off we go.
All right.
Knows where.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, guys.
Listen.
All right. All right. So let me officially welcome on to the guest as a guest tonight, Brandon Schexnayder. Brandon is a veteran audio engineer with a passion for pushing the boundaries of what's possible between your earbuds. After a long career in Music Row recording studios, helping artists like George Strait and Leanne Womack make their albums, Brandon decided it was his turn to tell stories and create something for himself. So he enlisted the help of his sister, Brienne, and the Southern Gothic was born, which is the podcast we have linked up at the top, so make sure you go check that out. Today, when Brandon isn't knee-deep in ghost stories, he spends most of his time working with other podcasters, whether that is editing and mixing audio, consulting for growth and monetization, or just goofing off talking about middle-aged dad stuff like Bigfoot, which I am more than willing to talk about as well. Welcome to the show, Brandon. I'm glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you so much, y'all. I've got my Bigfoot mug right here, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I guess I was a musician as well. So I kind of like, I know we want to talk about the weird stuff, but I was curious. So how did, so kind of just going back to the beginning here, how did all this kind of start for you? Like getting into that business and then kind of jumping from that to where you're at now?
Yeah. Being in the, well, you know, I was an audio engineer. So, I like to joke, you know, like I'm a musician. I play guitar. I play some instruments. I make all the music for my podcast even, but, I live in Nashville, and I don't admit that I'm a musician here. So, you know, I'm not that kind of you know, I'm not that good, right? But you know, I came up to Tennessee to be in the recording studio scene. I've always been kind of a tech guy. Always been just really obsessed with you know, with audio, with speakers, with you know, with stereo equipment, right? And so, and obviously, you know, computers. So, kind of came in that kind of end of the music industry, and worked in studios for years. And kind of just like you said, it was something I really enjoyed. Got to be around a lot of creative people, but your job as an audio engineer, recording engineer, when you're making records is, you know, you're more like a contractor and less like an architect. You know, so, you know, even though it's a craft, even though I am being able to be creative or was being able to be creative in that role, you know, at the end of the day, I was making other people's houses, right? You know, so so I, you know, I don't want to say it got old. I loved it. I absolutely enjoyed it. I loved the people up there. I had a blast. But, you know, I wanted to kind of, you know, jump off onto my own and podcasting just, it really, there was something about it being this like, you know, wide, you know, this blue ocean, right? You know, there's so much that hasn't been done. I still believe there's so much that hasn't been done in podcasting, and, you know, saw that opportunity and just kind of started heading in that direction, you know?
Well, I think there really is a huge connection between those two things, like the music world and the podcast world. And just those skills of being able to produce is a huge thing. Something I wish I would have spent more time with in my time in music, because I played in bands and I was the singer. So I was the guy who went in the studio and did what I had to do, and I didn't care about the other stuff, and then I would leave. Yeah. And now 20 years later, I'm like, okay, how do I mix this audio? It sounds like complete crap. So that's one of those things that I've had to kind of like go back and learn that and pay attention to then.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I was nonstop alone in the studio. It was not a social job, the parts that I did. Yeah.
No. Yeah. I've seen that work. Yeah. That's long hours. And that's a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always said, for my time in music, I like writing music, but recording music was my least favorite part. Just because it was tedious. And by the time I would get out of the studio, I would hate every song that we had recorded. Like I never wanted
sounds about right.
I never wanted to play. You know, it was like now we're going to go play a show, because performing live was my favorite part. And then I would be like, oh man, I've heard that song like a million times in the last 2 days. I don't even want to play it now. So it takes a special person, in my opinion, to be able to go through and have a passion for that and to love all that time that it takes to spend to get that thing sounding just right.
Yeah.
Well, plus when you're a creative person, the creating part is the part that you enjoy. Not having to help somebody else create stuff. It's the same way with me with photography. Is like, I love taking pictures, but when I have to do it for somebody else's wedding, it's not as fun.
Yeah, it's kind of different, you know, different angles. You know, I think that part of it, when I'm doing something for somebody else, you know, the creativity kind of comes in a way of, it's more like problem solving creativity, right? Like somebody says they want it to sound like it's blue.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And really trying to figure that out and trying to find something cool. And, and it's a craft. I mean, it's something that, you learn. And so you kind of have a standard of what you feel is objectively good and tasteful. And then you have, somebody who has an idea and you're trying to make sure that you can fulfill their idea, but still make sure it hits this level of professionalism. And, so there's creativity in it. But like you said, I mean, that is an insane amount of hours. I mean, look, I still am probably a bit too much of a workaholic, but it was, I mean, it was a lot. You would spend, and, you'd say like a musician would come in and they would track a record, would record a record for a week. And this week is the only time they'd be in the studio for like 2 years, right? So they would, I mean, that would be crunch time, and for myself, that week would then be followed by another month or two on the same record. Not to mention followed by yet another week. So it wasn't a very balanced life in any way, shape, or form. Podcasting definitely has offered a different, where I still might do a 12-hour day every now and then, but, I at least can, stop for lunch, and I kind of have my own schedule to a certain extent, but
Absolutely.
yeah, man, it was a good career, a lot of fun as a younger person.
I bet.
Yeah.
It's
You add a family in there, it probably gets a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
I mean, that job is so important because the music you hear, I mean, it's the musician, it's the bands, but the producers and the people working on the audio, like they leave a mark on those albums. Sometimes I end up defining the band and it's not even what they did, right? Like the sound you got from the amps and stuff like that is like the new sound that everybody wants. And really a lot of times that's just all done by kind of behind the scenes. So that's awesome. So how did you transition from that into Southern Gothic?
Sure. Well, I mean, like you said, I just kind of, I wanted to do something different, right? I wanted to do something creative. I'd have downtime. I'd make a record for like a month and then I might have a few weeks off or something, right? I knew I wanted to do something that was weird. That's the buzzword here, right? Yeah. And that's my buzzword. I mean, I wanted to do something weird, I wanted to do something that really kind of like, went around and weird, and I was really, I've always been into just, I don't know, when it came to audio and sound, I grew up really into like I was into like metal and Pink Floyd, right? And, I was growing up down in New Orleans, so I was really into that kind of swampy, but like still very vibey, studio kind of thing that like a Pink Floyd would do. And so, I knew I wanted to do something that kind of captured the vibe of that kind of swampiness. And I knew it was going to be something that was dark, and kind of have that to it. I don't know if I was totally sold on telling ghost stories right out of the gate, but it was certainly something that, it was certainly, on the short list, right? Like it was certainly in that kind of general niche. So I don't know. I don't even remember when the decision was made specifically to do the ghost story part. But once the idea came in that I was going this direction, it was like flipping a switch when it came to creativity. Once the decision was going to do this, and I talked to my sister a lot about it. Growing up down in New Orleans, there's just so many stories you knew to begin with, and it really became this thing where we knew growing up down there, we knew all of these stories. We knew, all of these things, but did we really know? And that was the question that in a lot of ways we tried to ask. And as we looked at other places and stories and all, it's like, okay, well, like, what'd your mama tell you? And then let's go understand really what happened. Would you remember, your mama trying to freak you out at night? And then let's look at the historical context. Let's see if this was real. Let's see what the story really, all those sorts of things, right? And that just flowed, and it was that way. And I joke that kind of the vibe of my show when it comes to the music and the sound effects is really because I'm just not that great of a musician. And that's just what that's like all I could do. And thank God it works for what the stories are, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all about creating that vibe.
Yeah.
It's all about creating that vibe. Sometimes you don't have to be a shredder to make a cool vibe, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a personality, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, I learned early enough in being in creative fields, you think you have to sound professional and you think you have to do this. And along the way, you really struggle with the fact that you don't feel like you ever sound professional, even if you did 10,000 hours of work on that craft, right? But you are a professional. The problem is you still sound like you. You just sound like a professional you.
Yes.
And you don't like you because you think you need to sound like a professional. And I don't mean to make this creative therapy here or anything, but
no, I think I'm getting ready to lay down,
is.
and you can talk to me about this because you just explained like I think my whole musical career. So
but that's it's what it is. And at the end of the day, I learned a lot talking to songwriters here because songwriters here are the kind of guys where they're expected to churn out like 30, 40 songs a year in Nashville, right?
Yeah,
and
it's insane.
And they're professional, so they go in every day and they write whether they like it or not. And so they got a lot of beliefs on that. And here they are like right now. I have some friends that they got some hits that are like sound like really bad pop country, right? But they got back home. If you were to sit down with them, they've got like a Stairway to Heaven, that they've written that just isn't on the radio,
Yes.
But this is what the course is that continues to, propel them forward and being able to be a professional creative. So, I don't know if that goes tangential. We're here to talk about ghosts. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, it's all interesting.
Whatever.
And I thought when you were talking about like collecting the stories, finding the history, and then making all the music and the sounds that go with it, like that just sounds like so much fun to like put it all together and then find like the final product. Like, that sounds like fun.
Well, we didn't know. When you make something and you guys do this, we didn't know what we'd be good at. Like, I didn't know if it would be good, but I knew that like my sister knew how to do research. She's a master's degree in it. She works at the Louisiana State Museum in the archives. This is what she knows how to do. I knew that I could make it sound good, right? Could we write? We're going to find out. Could we tell a story? I don't know. But so it really, we kind of leaned on those two. And then eventually it's just fascinating how fast, like we were so interested in it. But it's incredible how much it's become a passion of more the storytelling, that third component to it that wasn't there when we started. I mean, that's the thing that really lights me up now at this point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
That's so. I know you had some questions you were talking about earlier, Jenny. Do you have anything you want to go to specifically?
Well, you know me, I always have a list. So let's see. So where did it start for you personally with paranormal stuff?
Paranormal. Well, we, obviously, like I said, we grew up down in New Orleans. So there's certainly kind of that vibe of, you grow up kind of in that area. Now, we typically what we tell people, our parents were genealogists. They were amateur genealogists. And this was, I was born in the 80s. So this was pre-internet, right? This was pre-ancestry.com. So what that meant was they drug us to cemeteries all over southeastern Louisiana as children, and so we spent a lot of time in places that most kids don't go. I mean, most kids,
Sounds familiar. I have a similar experience.
Yeah. I mean, And so I kind of joke, that's kind of the start of it. You fall in love with cemeteries, right? And even to this day, I tell people, you go to a cemetery, beautiful. I mean, it doesn't even have to be beautiful, but you go to a cemetery and it's like every 2 or 3 feet is literally a lifetime of stories right there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And it was just fascinating. And it was, it's something that just propelled forward, again, I remember I was telling you before we got on the air, I spent a lot of time up in Alexandria, Virginia, growing up. And I remember going on a ghost tour when I was way too young to be on a ghost tour. And
Those are the best times.
isn't it? Yeah, because it really stuck with me. And
Yeah.
and I remember some stories from that. And I remember being in the cemetery, and we even did an episode on was it The Female Stranger. And I remember being a kid, hearing that story, and then going and doing the research and being like, oh, that's not that bad. But, so it kind of, it's definitely something that's kind of gone through, from the cemeteries and that, and it kind of is just something that evolved over time, being in this and doing this kind of stuff. But it didn't really become a passion until I started really getting into it this way. And then it just became, I don't want to call it an obsession by any means, but it became something that I can't not. I feel sorry for people who hang out with me sometimes, right?
So
no way, because that's the whole reason why you're here, is to talk about it. So it can't be
you
that,
guys think so?
Yeah.
it can't be that boring.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what?
Go ahead, Frost. You got a question?
Let's go through a couple of stories here. What
Yeah.
have been some of your favorite, just because they're that good, or just because they had a good twist to them, or they were really interesting to research?
Right.
What's been some of your favorite ones that you've kind of gathered up?
Yeah, well, we have one that's just become like the white whale. I mean, it has become a story that just has fascinated us, and it's this story of this woman who supposedly was a voodoo priestess that destroyed this small swamp town. A woman by the name of Julia Brown, and we came upon it. My sister had seen it on a television show back maybe early 2000s, right? And so when we started doing the show, she remembered seeing this, and we had to go looking. But it's something that's really close to our house. So anyway, just to tell the story, this woman, Manchac Swamp. All right. So if you were to drive from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, about halfway between the two is a swamp. It's called Manchac. And there was once a town there called Frenier. Okay. In this town, it was a very isolated town in the middle of the swamp. There's no way in or out unless you went there by boat or you went by train. Okay. And this was back in the early 1900s. So it wasn't that long ago, but yet the town was this isolated, right? And they were all German farmers who lived there in Frenier. At one time, it was called Schlosser. So this was blonde hair, blue eyed family. It was people like Schexnayder, right? People like me in this town, and they were harvesting cypress trees out in the swamp and all. And but there was this woman who lived there with her family on the edge of town. This woman named Julia Brown. She owned a good bit of land, over 40 acres, out in the swamp on the edge of town. She was born enslaved. She was an African American woman born enslaved in New Orleans. At this point in time, in the early 1900s, she was later in years. She was between 60 to 80 when she passed away. She lived there out in the swamp. The land actually was a reward. It was payment to her husband, Celestin Brown, who fought in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. He was part of what was called the U.S. Colored Troops during the Civil War. And this land out in the swamp was his payment. So she lived out there for years and years with Celestin, lived on the edge of town. Whether or not she's a voodoo practitioner or not, of course, that's up to the story. But she did root work. We know that. She did root work, and she took care of the folks there in town, right? If somebody was sick, well, and they didn't want to go all the way back into New Orleans, wait for the train or anything, so she would help take care of them, right? If she's a bit of a midwife, so she delivered a lot of the children out there in Frenier, right? Became really a very integral part of this community. But at some point, her relationship with the community started to sour. Okay. It was likely after Celestin passed away and she was out there on her own. And people said that they'd go out to see her out at her cabin on the edge of town, and then find her she'd be in a rocking chair on the porch, fiddling with like a little piece of string or something. And she'd be singing this song saying, "When I die, I'll take the whole town with me. When I die, I'll take the whole town with me. All right.
Mm.
So you can imagine, all these German blonde hair, blue eyed folks are out there. And here's a voodoo who they believe is a voodoo priestess or a practitioner. And she's singing this song. They feel like she has cursed her, right? Like they are doomed out there in Frenier. Well, eventually, as folks do, Julia passed away. It was September 1915. She passes away. And 2 days later, they have her funeral. And of course, the whole town comes to the funeral. Now we can suppose maybe it's because she was the beloved member of she was the midwife. She might have delivered a lot of the people who came there, right? She helped the town. Maybe it's because they loved her, or maybe they were afraid and they wanted to appease her soul, right? It was standing room only at this house where they were having her funeral. But the folks in town, it was so isolated. They had no idea that on that very day, there was a hurricane that was making landfall down at the coast, down in New Orleans. And this hurricane was making its way headed up the river towards where Frenier was. So it was literally during her funeral when all those bands of the hurricane started to hit. And so they're there to celebrate this woman or appease her soul. And the rain starts falling. And all the winds start picking up and everything kind of starts coming together. So you can imagine the terror of everybody there who are sitting there thinking in the back of their minds, when I die, I'll take the whole town with me. And the walls start shaking, right? So they go running. Everybody's going out and they realize that, the storm surge is pulling the waters up at the swamp there. There's folks, about 25 folks. They head out to the railroad. They get on the train and the train conductor tries to get them down the road, but it's too flooded. They only get about a mile down the road. Say people were trying to get away from the floodwaters, that they were climbing the trees to try and get away.
Wow.
But that was a worse fate because they could hear their family and friends down below screaming as they drowned.
Oh, no.
So you can imagine just this horror and this just torrential as it went. So at the end of the day, once the hurricane had passed, over 200 people, they estimate 200 to 400 people in southeastern Louisiana died.
Wow.
During that hurricane. It was the largest unnamed storm right up until they started naming them, later in the 20th century, right? 1915 hurricane. Now, of course, to this day, if you go out to the Manchac Swamp, people, say they hear things, folks out in there, there's been stories here or there, whether or not people have claimed to come in contact with Julia. I've never really heard a great, really good, cohesive ghost story about what they've done there. But that town of Frenier, it never came back. It was totally destroyed. And if you go down there today, there's a really good seafood restaurant right at that exit over there, which I'll totally recommend. And there's also a swamp tour, but that's it. Completely, it's never been able to come back after all that time. So this has become a story that we're fascinated with, because it really lends to the question of, was Julia Brown this kind of vengeful voodoo practitioner, this voodoo priestess that was mad at the community and destroyed it? Or was she a woman who just merely was warning them about what was going to happen? Or was any of it true in any way, shape, or form? And what's absolutely telling about the whole thing, and the thing that really sets the ball into motion of really grappling with the reality of this story, is that we know when Julia died, right? We have a death certificate even. We know when she died. And 2 days later, there's even an obituary in the New Orleans newspaper for her that mentions the storm hit Frenier while all the community was there at her funeral.
Wow.
So we even have a documented record. Now, that obituary never mentioned voodoo, right?
Yeah.
But supposes right then and there that connection between the two. So we've been fascinated by this. We have found everything we can. When you talk about research rabbit holes, I mean, we've found every census record we can find on her and looked everything over the years to figure out when was she a voodoo priestess? Did she even practice voodoo? When did she become the vengeful woman? When did these things happen? Because what I've learned doing ghost stories is these things are like a game of telephone. Okay. Yeah. And gradually change, and every telling changes a little more. And you never know. Like if I make a mistake telling you guys right now, and the right TV producer comes and watches this or something and decides they're going to do it, and they quote me, and then we have little alterations with our ghost stories. So Julia's been our most fascinating for sure. Yeah.
Sounds like it. And then you were saying, like, did she really curse the town, or did she warning them? But then also it could be, if they thought she was cursing them, they could have collectively brought that energy on themselves.
Yeah. There's a lot to that story, and there's a lot more. I feel like, we look at it in a lot of ways, the story from almost like a literary cultural sense, in a lot of ways of when did the voodoo part get attached? The reality is that, even if this wasn't a voodoo, and like you're saying right here, there's answers to this that could go any direction. It doesn't have to be voodoo or not voodoo.
Yeah.
This was a severe event down there. It was certainly something. And, I tend to believe that what it was is I tend to believe she was warning them. They were chopping down cypress trees out there. These are trees that were 200 years old in the swamp. I tend to believe that, when you talk about, that kind of bringing it on yourself and that spiritual element to it, you're destroying your home, so I tend to lean that way personally. Yeah.
Especially if she was a root worker. I mean, she's working with plants and trees, and maybe she was pissed off they were cutting all the trees down.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the coolest parts about that, though, is having the historical documents kind of, so it's just not some fireside story that someone made up, like there's this root of truth no matter what. Well, I guess,
Pun. Did you just throw a pun in there? Is that a
didn't mean
bad
to.
pun?
Yeah.
I never make a pun on purpose. I'm not that intelligent, but
this is what we're finding. I mean, this is what we find, and I think it's one of the wonderful things about sticking to like a geographic region like I do and staying in the southern region is, we see these things that have these little kernels of truth, and then watch how they open up. And it's been fascinating how, the different elements, you can even tell, probably what time range, certain stories might have come about because of kind of the cliches or tropes, right? But they all kind of go back to something that was real that folks are trying to explain in some way,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can't just dismiss it because you have the historical documents. So it's like, you're kind of stuck trying to figure that part out and going about whether she was doing like, voodoo or not. I don't know even if she was a prolific practitioner that you would have the evidence, because not a lot of people are going to write about that. That's going to be something they kind of whisper about and no one's ever going to really put down on paper. So.
Well, there's this one thing that when we were first starting to look where somebody had said in some article or something, right, that, there's a voodoo priestess in New Orleans who has records saying that she was a voodoo practitioner. Mm-hmm. And man, we have scratched our heads and gone looking for whoever this person is or what they are. And nothing. No, and of course it gets all this stuff attached to it. Like, of course, early tellings that we saw, she was Marie Laveau's cousin, right? Well, no, could not find that. It was like anytime voodoo was a part of the story, they had to kind of try and, so there's all those things too that just, mess with it, and just kind of do those parts. But, again, that's ultimately what's fascinating about some of those things. Yeah.
Interesting.
Pretty cool story. For sure.
Yeah, that was a good one. We have we have some interesting ones that we've talked about before, like when our we do like a Halloween special where we do ghost stories. So I might try to steal one more for you when we start getting into that spooky season.
Yeah.
I got a question for you specifically, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, which is hanging around with musicians. In my experience, you tend to talk about kind of some weird stuff with that. Did you have any situations when you were working there in Music Row and all that kind of stuff where you were getting, where you would hear ghost stories going through the music industry specifically?
I mean, you know, I don't know if I heard as much weird stories like that. I know we do have a place here outside of town. It's called The Castle, and it's this old it's a recording studio now, but it's this old building that looks like a castle, and it's just out on the edge of town. And it's supposedly Al Capone owned it. And so there was like, this is where he sent people to cool off when they got in trouble, right? And so everybody had like stories about when they were there late at night, you know, they heard a noise or something happened, and you know, everybody kind of had weird stories, but I think that was the most of the ghost stories. I think the thing that lent itself with the circle I ran in, at least, is some of my really good friends, while they wrote, you know, modern country music, tended to angle more to a vibe of kind of more of a bluegrass Americana thing in their own personal creativity, in their own personal life. And you know, one of my best, you know, friends in the industry, and we made a record with him. He actually grew up, his family owned a funeral home, and you know, so he kind of grew up in that. And we made his kind of solo record at one point that was like his kind of opus. And I mean, he had written songs for like Alan Jackson, all these people, and you know, written very mainstream songs, but he was going to make his record with the songs that he wanted that nobody else was going to sing, right? Mm-hmm. And we joked that like this record, he murdered like 20 people and like 8 songs on this record, okay? Because it was just, it's this dark bluegrass, you know, this, and it went through so many dark themes.
Should he have been a member of GWAR instead?
I mean, with a Mando, you know, like but it was fast. It was, and he's such a poetic writer that it was, I can't even describe, but it was so, it was, I mean, it was so, oh my gosh, I can't remember now. The name of the author, The Road, he just passed away. I'm embarrassed. He wrote The Road. Oh gosh. He was writing the Westerns. Oh dear. No Country for Old Men. Oh gosh. Clearly anyway, it was that kind of just, you know, a very heavy, a writer that just wrote about heavy topics. And it was, if it was not so artistic, it would be like creepy, right? You know, it would be, so those, I mean, that was kind of a lot of, you know, what the guys that I would hang out with would kind of have those similar kind of things in their storytelling. So, yeah.
Cormac McCarthy, is that who we're talking about? That's
Cormac McCarthy. That's him. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. It's just a, you know, prolific author, that just a literary genius. But man, that was some messed up stuff in those books. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought that was curious, because I know in a lot of music circles that you get those late nights. You know, we were talking before the show, but those late nights you start having the weird conversations and, I saw this one time, and hey, one time I was out, and I don't know, man, I had this guy tell me about this thing, and you just, you know, a lot of times, you know, you're looking to pass time, and those are the things you end up hearing and talking about. What else did you have, Jenny? I know you got a bunch over there. I want to make sure we get to them. And also, real quick, before we get started there, for everyone that's hanging out with us in chat tonight, if you have a question for Bannon, make sure you can highlight that, put it in chat, and we will make sure we pass the question along. And we have pinned to the top of the chat where you can go and find the Southern Gothic. So you can go southerngothicmedia.com. On Twitter, the SoGo podcast, or I guess that's X now. And so make sure you go check that out. You know, follow, subscribe, all of those cool things, and listen to some cool stories. I have started to I've checked a couple out, and I'm one of those people where I'm going to bed at night, I have to have a little something in my ear. So a good ghost story when I'm trying to go off to dreamland is definitely right up my alley. So I'm gonna listen to a bunch more.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, what do you got, Jenny?
I noticed you had a monster series.
Yes.
And I wanted to know what was your favorite one so far.
Oh man, well, I grew up on the Rougarou.
The Rougarou, I haven't heard of that.
The Rougarou, yeah. So, I would say that's my most nostalgic. I'll tell you my favorite one after, but the Rougarou it's like a Cajun werewolf. Okay, so it's just down in New Orleans. If you grew up down there, you heard about it because the zoo had like a mock-up of the Rougarou, and so kids just. Kids would go to the zoo just to see the Rougarou mock-up, right? Or at least we did. And but yeah, it's a Cajun werewolf. It's just out in the swamp. It had some like Catholic overtones to it, right? Because it had some things around it with Lent. When you might turn into a Rougarou if you don't observe Lent, and and really it was just this. It was this old story that kind of came from France, right? Like this kind of werewolves and that early werewolf stories from that part of Europe. And when they came to the swamp, they brought it with them, But by far, my favorite monster story is the Poplik monster. Have you ever heard of that one?
No,
I've heard of it, but
you're teaching us all kinds of new monsters today.
It sounds familiar, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, so most of my dealings in monsters are more story related again, rather than, I've got friends who will go hunt for Bigfoot and go do those things. But the Poplik monster, I actually got to go visit it's in Louisville. Okay. And there's this old bridge up there outside of Louisville. It's over Poplik Creek. Okay. And just outside of town. And you can tell the town is really moving. And this was farmland for a really long time. And it was kind of probably out of town for a long time. And it probably won't be for much longer. But, the story goes that, this big bridge, this Poplik trestle, it's a railroad, a main artery of the L&N Railroad going through there into Louisville. Okay. And the story goes that back in the early 20th century, there was a circus that was coming out of town. And in the middle of the night, of course, there was a storm. As they're crossing Poplik Creek, a lightning strikes the train and the train comes crashing down, right? And everybody in there dies except for this one individual, okay? And who's now the Poplik monster. It's this creature that had become a sideshow attraction that the circus, whoever runs the circus, right, had found on his doorstep one day a baby of this half man, half goat. Okay, so it's pretty traditional goat man, right? And so this train comes crashing down, and of course the goat man crawls out and everybody else is dead in the train, and he just decides to keep living there under that bridge and stay there at Poplik Creek. And of course tormenting everyone else that comes that way for, the rest of time, apparently, right? So, of course, over the years, folks talked about it, well, first of all, what's the origin? How did he become a goat man? Is it a product of, some relations? Or, of course, somebody talks about, a farmer who did satanic, rituals at his farm and all. And whatever you believe, we've all heard of goat men, and it is a pretty traditional. And he did the traditional things. People would go out there, out to the creek, and they would park, and teenagers would go out there to have some love time, and of course there would be stories of this goat man attacking, but the
goat man isn't up for that.
Yeah, but the biggest thing that he did that folks talked about is he would use voice mimicry to lure people into him. Okay, so you might hear like your grandmother who had passed away, calling you up, right? And in reality, this has actually become incredibly dangerous, whether you believe in the Poplik monster or not, because people will come out there looking for the Poplik monster, okay? And people would come out there and they would actually go up to the train tracks and go up on the trestle not realizing this is still a very much active train line.
Oh my goodness.
So over the years, even as recently as I believe it's 2017 or 18, there were some teenagers up there who actually were killed. A young woman was killed while trying to climb up there. So it's a dangerous story in a lot of ways. It's a story that the story itself has probably been more lethal than the myth of the Pope Lake monster. But it is it's one of my favorite because it gets really creative with some of the things with that goat man, a different kind of version of goat man than some of the more traditional ones as well. So that
one plus just saying the name Popelik is pretty fun. Just in
yeah. I mean, I went out and visited. It's beautiful out there too. I mean, there's a park and everything, and this creek and all is like a walking trail. And still, actually, the thing that was, really, like kind of sunk in when we went out to visit up there was there's still a memorial there for that young woman, that teenager, that people have been leaving flowers and all. So it was a really good reminder that some of these stories, or ghost stories even, they involve real individuals sometimes. I mean, sometimes, all the time, but sometimes it is really close,
And they take on a life and story of their own even afterwards. Like, even if it is just a myth, it ends up having some, once again, that seed of truth to it. That one specifically kind of caught my attention because it reminds me a whole lot, and I'm so many places. It's like Americana, like a slice of Americana, where all the no matter where you go in the country, everyone kind of has like their local urban legend or myth or ghost story, a place like that. And this one, I don't know if you've heard of this one before, but it reminded me a lot of something we have in Virginia called the Bunny Man Bridge.
Oh,
have you heard of that one before?
Do not mention the Bunny Man around my 9-year-old.
Okay.
She does not ever. Don't even say the name. That kid will run screaming.
Oh no.
Yeah. We accidentally listened to the wrong podcast one day.
Oh no, poor thing.
And it's probably in her nightmares. Oh, I've heard of the Bunny Man. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of similarities with that story with the train bridge and people dying in the modern day, going there because they've been hit by vehicles or whatever when they were trying to check it out and stuff like that. So
yeah. And I found a good bit of stories like that as well. I mean, I was just looking at one. It's out in South Carolina. It's a similar thing. It was a train story in 2010. Same deal. Folks not really being careful. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Then they become part of the story too.
And going back,
and as a storyteller, I struggle with it sometimes as well. With how that works out and what level of glorifying it. There's a story down in Atlanta. It's Lake Lanier. Have you ever heard of Lake Lanier? It's kind of one of these ones that's starting to gain steam, and you're going to start seeing on a lot more TV shows. It's already started on it, and supposedly Lake Lanier is cursed. Okay. And there's way more to the story that I won't get into, but for the longest time, they talked about there was this one ghost that was a lady in blue who would walk across this bridge. And it's right outside of Atlanta in Gainesville. And for years and years, and essentially they said it was the ghost of one of the women who had died in a car accident back in, I believe it was 58. The car went over the bridge, went in. About a year, they couldn't find the car at the time. About a year later, somebody was fishing out there and they ran into a body on the lake. And it was, they couldn't even identify the body right away. They thought it was the girl, but another like 20, 40 years passed by. And when they were dredging the lake to make this bridge larger, they found the car with one of the women in there. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And it was a popular story. It was really sad, right? These two women were driving at night, and they both had families, both had kids. And but this story, this story of the lady in blue had become popular down there. People are talking about it. They called her the Lady of the Lake. And I went and visited the lake, and we decided to go to the cemetery. I told you guys I like cemeteries, right? So we decided to go to the cemetery where they were buried, and I wanted to go and and see their tombs and visit them, basically thank them, and I went to one of them, and it was kind of gut wrenching because we walked up to it, and there was this little like, it was like almost, oh man, it was just trinket. I don't know what you'd call it, but it said, "I love you, Mom." So the woman's child, who, I mean, at that point, I think it even passed away a few years ago, 70s maybe, had left this at there. And it was just really a good reminder that, again, as you tell ghost stories and you entertain this way, these are real people, and they're not just, these ghosts. If you can imagine this gentleman, heard this ghost story in Atlanta for years, and it was his mother. And, that's definitely something we take into mind sometimes when we tell stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that would be important because, it's one thing to tell a story that, about something that happened 200 years ago or 100 years ago,
right,
but to bring up something, because if these are true, then there's new ghost stories being created all the time. And so what's the ethics of telling ghost stories? I mean, that's a
right,
good question. Yeah. That's a good question.
Brings up a lot of different aspects of it.
We were talking about cryptids earlier, and you were talking about essentially the Wolfman down in Louisiana. That's
I did look up a picture of the Rougarou.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
and I saw from the zoo. It was very scary.
Yeah.
That is
a generational trauma of every New Orleans child.
I can imagine.
Guy at the zoo. Yeah.
We had a guest on a while back who wrote specifically about ghost stories and cryptid sightings in our local area. And the most popular sighting where we're at in Virginia is also, well, all over Virginia really, is also another Wolfman. So that seems to be pretty popular throughout at least the southern region there.
Yeah.
But what other are there any other cryptids that have kind of caught your interest? Things that you've heard about, things that you've had people see before?
Mostly a lot of, I don't find story-wise, I don't find as wide of a variety in the cryptids as I do the ghost stories. It's almost more regional versions of other ones, so you kind of like the skunk ape in Florida is really, we've got the Honey Island swamp monster down in Louisiana. It's pretty much, it sounds like it's a Bigfoot,
well, we have the wood booger.
The wood booger.
Booger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
you
what
win
we
the
call
best
around
name
here.
right there.
Yeah, the wood booger.
Wood booger.
Yeah.
In all Virginia,
I mean, so there's really not a wide variety. I mean, there's some cool old ones, there's like the Wampus cat out here in Tennessee, but that's more of like this old indigenous story, or at least, our version of an old, native story. It's not really one that you get sightings over or anything. But if you want to consider West Virginia a southern state, I mean, they're the king right there with the cryptids, right?
Yeah.
So we just went. Well, it's been a little while back, but we went on a weekend getaway. We were magically swept away to West Virginia.
Oh man, no, I want to go.
It's beautiful.
I bet. Yeah.
And we didn't kind of even realize when we made the trip that we were kind of in the middle of Mothman territory.
Yeah.
And so there was Mothman statues and mannequins everywhere, and you could buy all the Mothman stickers, and that was another very interesting one. I think maybe
Mothman festivals in 2 weeks, I think, or a week and a half.
Ooh.
Like in September. And so my girlfriend and I were talking about going. But her friend has a party, so we can't go this year. I'm really disappointed. Okay. But we were talking about going to Mothman Festival and dressing up as Men in Black.
Oh, that'd be fun.
But it's definitely, I mean, that Mothman, man, I think he's the king. He's definitely the king down here.
It became a pretty prolific story. And there's still a lot of people. There's still, still sightings. I would say maybe second to Bigfoot, maybe at this point.
Yeah.
don't know.
Obviously, I think to me, when I look at cryptids and when I look at stories and things, to me, like Bigfoot, I'm at the point with Bigfoot, and this is not, I don't do Bigfoot for a living. So this is just as a middle-aged dad who's obsessed with watching, was it Cliff and Bobo in the Woods on Travel Channel, right? Mm-hmm. To me, Bigfoot just feels like an animal out there. I don't get into the supernatural version of him. Mm-hmm. I feel like he's just another critter out there in the woods, whereas the Mothman to me feels like it borders the paranormal. That's my non-expert opinion. Thank you.
Bigfoot's been interesting to me because that's the way that I originally kind of viewed Bigfoot. Okay, so there's another kind of Homo sapien or like another kind of some sort. Primate or some kind of ape that's out there. That's not unheard of. Like we discover new kinds of animals all the time. Now we're finding like very large mammals all the time. Not really, but the more I kind of delved into Bigfoot, the more it seemed like that story started getting very connected to like stuff that I wasn't expecting, like UFO sightings. Like like a lot of the people that I've heard that study Bigfoot, just like they don't know why, but it's like all of a sudden, like I'm a Bigfoot, I'm a researcher. I'm going out, I'm trying to get a picture of Bigfoot. I'm trying to find, scat or go through the woods, and then they see a UFO, and then it's like UFO, and then they see a Bigfoot, then they see a UFO, and that's been kind of intriguing to me as well. Like, why such a connection there all of a sudden? Because I kind of had the same feeling with that.
Yeah. Was it the Strange Familiars podcast? I think Tim, he was telling me he's written a lot about Bigfoot and he goes into the paranormal and Bigfoot and all, but he was telling even like he had all these lady in white sightings surrounding Bigfoot. So he's telling me about all the ghost attachments around it. But,
just stirring it all up.
It is, right. Beyond the veil. Right. But, I just never got too into, I don't know, maybe I'm just closed-minded when it comes to old Patty out there, and I just wanted to be, what I wanted to be. And I just went to the Bigfoot Museum in Portland just like 6 months ago. so I get in, I do get into Bigfoot. That's,
It just takes one finding. It just takes like one hair sample, at some point in time. I don't know.
It's a hide and seek champion of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're a firm believer, Jenny, right? Like,
I do.
I'm still in the middle. I'm like, I got to see something. I want to go out and look for him, but I got to see something.
We lived in the middle of frickin' nowhere in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And one night I was driving home and because I'm a medium and I pick up on energies, I was like, I could just feel it. Like I felt like there was a Bigfoot like crossing in the space in front of me, driving down our driveway. And I was like, oh my God. But it was pitch black dark out there. It's not like you could see anything,
Mm-hmm. I think it's awful arrogant of us. Like if you've ever flown over, even the Appalachians, but even if you've ever flown over out to like Seattle and Portland and that Pacific Northwest and just look down, like, I don't know, there's a lot of room for this. There is a lot of, there's no, and the same thing goes for how I view the paranormal, even like it's awful arrogant of us to think that we even know like that much, right? It's way overboard. So
I don't think a lot of people do, but I think there's a significant amount of the population that was born or grew up like in a suburban or urban environment that kind of stay in that environment and don't realize how much of the country, just talking about in the United States,
wilderness
is still wilderness. Like we live close to Richmond,
and it's not that far away from where you live, people.
Yeah. And like, if you go west of Richmond and headed up towards the Blue Ridge on 64, you got to, even this year, you kind of have to make sure you got some gas because it's going to be a while till there's somewhere where you can stop, like,
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people realize how much wilderness is still out there.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, and you factor in too, you know, with all of this paranormal stuff, I mean, you know, I think 99.9% of what we see, you know, whether it's Bigfoot or it's, you know, paranormal, really is explainable and kind of hokey, you know, and folks tend to see that and use that as that means all of it is.
Well,
You know, that
yeah.
really
Yeah.
turns people off to everything, you know, when the fact of the matter is it's that one little percent, you know, that hair sample, right? Like if I were to present you right now with a video of Bigfoot standing 5 feet away from me, right? And you looked at it and you were like, well, if you showed me evidence, I'd believe. And here's evidence. Here is evidence of Bigfoot. You would still struggle. Do I believe that Bigfoot is real or not before I believe if the video is real?
I have this conversation all the time with Jenny because I get real big into the Bigfoot, but I get really big into the UAP, the UFO, the alien thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like nowadays it's just this point of like, you could show me a video of a UFO landing on the White House lawn and extraterrestrials getting off of there and the president walking down and them shaking hands, and I probably wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Because because just there's so much that can be done through production. And I mean, here I am doing a podcast, you know, right from my, you know, den. So like there's people who can sit at home on their computers and create Hollywood level special effects, you know, so you just don't know what you're
I don't
seeing.
even mean it as like conspiratorial or not. I mean, that's a strong word. I don't even mean it like even necessarily as like somebody trying to even dupe you. I just, you know, like how many pictures of windows I have seen, right, that folks say there's a spirit there, and you know, and we look at it and it's like, oh, you know, I mean, I don't know about that, right? And I'm somebody who's made it my life and believes that, you know, like this isn't. I'm not trying to say that like ghosts aren't real at all. You know, that's not at all. But how many things do we get presented with, even as believers in it? Yes, that kind of unfortunately close people to that real element at the end of it. So
and I think there is like a large percentage you almost have to throw out, whether you're looking at ghosts, whether you're looking at Bigfoot, whether you're looking at UFOs. Like you're constantly, you know, if you're somebody who's trying to find the truth and you're trying to get to the truth of these stories like you are, when you know, doing the research and stuff behind them, there's just a certain amount at the face of it. You go, well, there's no way to verify this, or this you know, this is a stretch, or I don't know, in the ghost world, the orbs becomes a thing. Like, you know, is it really this orb moving across the room, or is it a piece of dust, or is it a gnat that's flying around reflecting light? Like, there's just some things you're like, well, I can't do anything with this. Have you ever? Oh, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead if you have a question.
Oh, well, I was going to ask, have you ever done like, I know like doing research for the stories and stuff you're doing on Southern Gothic, but any like, it sounds like you might have done some like paranormal research and have you been able to have like very many personal experiences?
You know, I haven't, Adam. I'm annoyed. Like, come on, I'm doing really good PR for you guys. All right. So like, come on, man. But, you know, I haven't really, you know, in all honesty, I do think that when we do a good job sometimes with some of these stories and bringing out the humanity of it, I think that there is something attached to that where something good happens. Like I feel like Julia Brown is an incredible example because, you know, that became such a mission of ours to present her as the humanity and the element of her being real. Mm-hmm. And early on when we were making Southern Gothic, it seemed, before I was talking about her all the time, even just kind of early in the, it seemed like a lot of our original kind of breaks that we got, a lot of the original kind of little boosts we got, always somehow seemed to like come back to her. Mm-hmm. And, we had gotten like a mention on Morbid, the big podcast. It's like one of the top 5 podcasts. It's, people, these two women, and they talk about true crime and ghost stories, right? And one day they mentioned our show, and they have 500,000 listeners an episode or something,
Wow.
right? And they mentioned our show, and we wake up one morning and just our listenership had like doubled overnight.
Wow.
And you're just mad, and just in shock. And we go and we listen, and they were talking about Julia Brown on that one, and not even related to us. So it was really, I do feel like that there's something to it there. When I talk about these experiences and all, I do feel like there's an element of that. But I do spend a lot of time going to stuff. I try. I mean, I've spent a night in Waverly Hills. I don't go with devices. I have some. I typically don't like to use that. I don't go searching for what I would call evidence.
Okay.
Like some people do. You have a lot of friends who do, so I'm not even knocking that at all. But I went to Waverly Hills, and I feel like there's this power, and maybe as a medium, you could even describe this to me, what I'm better than I can describe it. But in being so into history and being so into this, I feel like when I go to a location and just stand there and soak it in, that there's an energy there just in and of itself that just kind of permeates. And I feel like it brings more. So when I went to a place like Waverly Hills, it was a big deal for me to go, and I would go and sit down, and I would go hang out in certain spots and just like try and soak it up. And that's what I look for when I go to haunted places. And obviously I still haven't had, look, I went to Waverly. I wanted to see a dang shadow person. They promised me shadow people at Waverly Hills. Okay. And I didn't get my shadow person, but so I'm dying for that type of experience. And maybe that's the problem, that I want to have it, but I feel like when I go there, you can feel that heaviness, and I feel like that's real. And, when it came to that specific spot too, my girlfriend was with me, and she's just as adventurous and going she's the one that booked the tickets to go, right? She wanted to, we stayed, it was midnight to 6 a.m. in December in the cold.
Oh, yeah.
And we're on the 3rd floor. We were fine. I mean, she's, going, wanting to walk, going. I mean, we went to the little morgue thing, and she got in the morgue. I wasn't doing that. Okay.
Wow.
So she's more adventurous, but man, we were on the 3rd floor up there walking down this hallway, and she just grabbed my arm at one point. She's like, "We're going downstairs." She's like, "I don't know what it is, but just something overcame me." And, so I certainly, when I say all of this, I don't take that from a skeptical, but I haven't really had something that has made me, I haven't found what I'm looking for. Maybe that's a better way to put it. I haven't found what I want.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's the problem, right? Again, I tell you guys, I tell ghost stories about you all the time. Come on, man. I'm trying to promote you,
Yeah.
I have 2 things to say about that.
I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
I just finished reading a book about psychometry, which psychometry is the art of being able to gather information from the energy of a place or an object.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of sounds like that's what you are trying to experience, whether you realize it or not, is that you're just connecting with the energy of the location, trying to get to sense what you can sense. And for you, probably it's mostly just the emotion of it, because you probably have some sort of empathy skills, whether you realize that or not as well. So yes, that's very much like a psychometry type of thing, not just using your own body, your own energy to sense the energy of a location.
Uh-huh.
And then the other thing I want to tell you is that the whole point of this, the whole point of this searching is the search itself, and not necessarily finding the answer or the thing that you want. Like, it really is about the journey and the searching and the looking and the trying to figure out what the hell is happening in this existence that we have.
You make a good point there, actually.
It's the adventure that really changes everything. I totally buy into that. If you would have told me that 10 years ago, I probably would have flipped you off and been mad. Like, what are you people telling me?
But I want to see the Shadow Man.
I know. Y'all, we paid $60 for them tickets, but
I didn't see a Shadow Man crawling on the ceiling. I want my money back.
You're totally right. It's the joy. We go to these places all the time, and it's the joy in doing it and the connection that you make and going to these places. And, the places it takes you looking is surreal. We were in Charleston this summer and went to Edisto Island, to this cemetery out there, because I just told a story about it once, and we were in Charleston on vacation and we were going to go. Right. And drove out of town to the place where all the plantations were out of town, and went to this cemetery, and it was mind blowing how gorgeous it was, and how much, like, exactly like you're saying, how much just stepping into it, you just felt this like shift in time. Like, it was such the places it brings you. And that has probably been one of the most fun and the most rewarding parts of doing this work. Yeah.
And it also sounds like you specifically, and perhaps for your sister as well, since she's the one who does a lot of the research, that unbeknownst to you, when you started out, I'm sure that what you're finding is the thing that's really driving the passion of it is humanizing the stories and trying to make the people in it, like us, other people, the people listening, realize that these are people.
Yeah.
That seems like it's become the thing that is probably somehow, even though you probably never even thought that was going to be part of it, probably the most important part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think early on I had read a book when we were starting. We kind of asked about when things popped in your brain, and when I kind of decided that this was on the short list, and was reading a few things, and I had read like Colin Dickey's Ghostland, and came across a book called I think it was Dark Tourism in the American South. It was Dr. Taya Miles. She's a historian from Harvard, and she did African American history, and taught that. And she wrote this book. She also writes some fiction books that are kind of historical fiction. And she went down to Savannah on a trip to try and like soak up so she could write a novel. But when she got down there, she started going on ghost tours and started realizing how inaccurate they were, and how horrifically stereotyping and archetypal, and how badly they were just butchering humanity. And, and I remember very clearly when I read that book, and like I said, leaning on Brianne's research, when I read that book, there was definitely this like click that came in, how early on it's not necessarily about disproving it, but it is about how do we make sure that we do look at the people as they were, and they are. But it probably, when it comes to uncovering a Julia Brown type, is when that really came to life. And it certainly is. And I love that part. I think it's definitely become a running theme. It's definitely something that I think, like you said, that's part of the passion of it, for sure, is finding who those people are.
And to circle it all the way back around, it's from all those trips with your parents to the cemeteries, and just looking at someone's headstone and thinking, what was their story?
Who was that person?
Right.
Yeah. And I think when you go to those old cemeteries, what really is shocking to a lot of, especially out in the country or something, is you see it's all the same names. Mm-hmm. So really that extra ties in, you see families, and you see things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Very
Excellent.
interesting. So, podcast that was mostly supposed to be about ghost stories turned into like a humanitarian efforts.
Yeah, well, it's still mostly ghost stories. I think it's accessible enough to people to where I position it in the history genre. So it sits on the history charts. It's something that I definitely I hang out with history podcasters. That's my typical kind of the network I'm on specializes in history podcasts. So we stick it there as opposed to the more personal stories and the the society and culture like Astonishing Legends and all those guys are in. We try not to do too much about like supposition in terms of is something real or isn't, So we try and keep it as that kind of bend on the surface. But at least pop in, with those spots to allow that to really, you could go further with a lot of these for real. It's available, that way. So, yeah.
Well, I have to say, I mean, that's right down my alley. That's what I do. I got my degrees in history, and then the music. I tell you, man, I could talk to you. I think like all night because we have a lot of topics.
I told you I'm a Southern boy. I could talk all night.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah. And that's the great part is with these ghost stories. If you have the background and the history, you're able to start piecing things together and find out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and understanding the time frame and what's happening when you see this. All of a sudden, there's more headstones in a certain time frame. You're starting to go, okay, well, what was going on at this time? How is this connecting with this and that? And it makes it even more interesting to learn the history behind these, which I think. I'm looking forward. Like I said, I've been able to listen to a couple, and I'm looking forward to heading over there and listening to some more. Does anybody? I'll ask one more time if we got anybody has any questions in chat. Feel free to throw them in there, and we will probably be getting ready to wrap this thing up.
Well, I think that we need, in order to wrap this up, we need what was in the title here.
Yes.
What is one of your go-to favorite just pure ghost story?
Oh gosh, pure ghost story. It's funny because when people ask for ghost stories, so many of mine are these haunted history stories. Really, aren't quite as bump in the night or things of that nature. Oh man, so that's almost even a hard question.
Well, you could narrow it down to like thinking about, through your podcast episodes, like what was one that really stood out to you that was,
we had the Julia Brown one.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, there's this, this is probably more because I've been there, and it's one of the ones that really, stood out for me in terms of just felt kind of the most real. And it's a bit classic it's called The Bride of Annandale. And it's a story about a woman down in Mississippi, Helen Johnstone. She's a young woman down there. Her family owned a plantation down in Mississippi, just south of Jackson down there. And they built a church. As part of the community, they helped build a church. And of course, it's a story of young love, right? She falls in love with a gentleman, and the gentleman unfortunately doesn't make it to the wedding, and it's just a story with, it's a very classic Southern story, right? Where the gentleman, his name was Henry Vick. He went off to New Orleans to, prepare for this wedding. And of course, he got into a fight with another gentleman and ends up in a duel and gets shot. And poor Helen is decorating this church down there in Mississippi. And she gets the news while she's decorating the church, expecting to get married. And, and again, this is a historical story with a backing of, Helen. But, of course, after he died, she made the family promise, that if you, made her family promise that they would bury her next to Henry Vick. And you can go down there to that cemetery and you can see his tomb, but you'll notice that Helen is not next to him. And so folks believe that she still comes to this day. She went on and got remarried. They even say that she told her second husband, she said, look, I will marry you, but you need to know that I will be the best wife ever. I will take care of the children. I'll be loyal. I'll be faithful. I'll take care of all of these things. But my heart forever is going to pine for Henry. He's always going to have, and of course she passed away and they didn't bury her next to Henry. They buried her with that husband that she had. And so there's this little wrought iron bench that's sitting there in that cemetery, and you can go out in beautiful cemetery and you can see it. And folks claim to see her out there all the time, sitting and weeping. And it's a beautiful story, and it is a very long, drawn out, beautiful story about this kind of lost love. But at the same time, it goes into another archetype of, here in the South, we have a thing for, unfortunately, making women pine for men for eternity. I don't know what it is. It's always blonde hair, blue-eyed girls are supposed to cry for us dudes for the rest
wearing
of time.
A white dress. Yeah.
I mean, the lady in white, but it is a beautiful story and it's a beautiful place. And by far, that's probably one that I've really enjoyed from a really cut and dry, this is what happens when a soul, when you don't meet the promises of the soul, or the promises kept in life. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a lot of people in chat who are excited to go check out some of the podcasts. We have a question kind of from Priestess of Wonderland here who said, I'm curious why a sound engineer isn't interested in recording haunted places, because I bet Brandon would be good at it. So that is kind of
like
interesting.
EVPs and all.
Yeah, like and using kind of your experience with sound to see what you could get from these haunted places.
I will be 100% honest with you. I know too much about how audio works to believe EVPs.
Oh,
and,
that's interesting.
That is probably not the correct answer, but look, I understand how digital audio gets made. I understand about the phasing that comes with audio when you convert it to analog with the conversion. I understand the way they use frequencies to compress them into MP3s. And so of all the things, I come on here and say, of all the things that I really am truly skeptical of, EVPs actually are the number one. Now that being said, look, if, maybe we go out there and we have a conversation, we do the Estes method and we do something and, maybe, something comes out and it however we do it, you hear a voice come out and say it. But the concept of going in and taking that noise floor and shaping frequencies, I'm somebody who can, make something do, like by craft and by wanting to, I know what we can do. So I don't trust it,
Oh, so
kind of like those videos of Bigfoot that people might have made.
Yeah. If you're somebody who does special effects for a living, right? You probably struggle with something like that. Now that being said, I will say I do thoroughly enjoy taking my little field recorder out and recording. So like when I go, I guess it's the equivalent, even kind of an EVP. But when I do go to places, I enjoy recording kind of the ambiance of the area. And so every now and then, I do have an episode that just unbeknownst to people, or there'll be one for October. Okay, on October 9th, I have an episode coming out, and it's going to be an episode that is surrounding Charleston, specifically Sullivan's Island, which is an island out there. And when that episode comes out, when you're listening, there'll be sound effects and stuff, and there will be some ambiance in there of like being at a beach, and some ambiance in there of hearing like the the cicadas or something, right? Just kind of that it'll sound humid. Okay. That is actually recorded from the locations that I'm talking about.
Oh, that's really cool.
So when I can do that, I love doing that. But when it comes to EVPs, unfortunately, it's like the curse of,
Yes.
the curse of skepticism there. Yeah.
I have a question for you specifically about that, though.
Sure.
Is that just being skeptical of other people's recordings, or skeptical if you were to catch something yourself on a recording?
I think it's skeptical of the devices.
Okay.
So, there's that one recorder that everybody was really into that thinks that that's the one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an old analog to digital converter.
Mm-hmm.
That just it's the way the filters work on it and all, the way it treats the noise floor, all those things. Again, if you play one for me where there's a voice and there's, that's one thing. But
yeah,
typically as people, as the majority of EVPs go, it's hearing, almost those swells and voices and honestly, the same kind of does, ring true a little bit with the spirit boxes to me. As a musician and as an audio guy,
yes.
that flipping of the channels really fast.
Yep.
I understand what happens when you combine certain frequencies, how that can then sound like a phantom tone and things like that. And so I get a little skeptical with the audio stuff. Is that correct or not? I don't know.
No, I get you on that, because I'm skeptical of the spirit box, and there's like another thing out now. I don't even know what they call it. That sounds like really echoey. I've been very skeptical of that. There was a lot of debate at one point when everything was kind of switching from analog to digital about whether it would continue to work on digital recorders, and it seems to have, but it still puts you in that same spot we were talking about before. Whenever I hear a really good EVP, like a really clear EVP, I go, okay, well, there's no denying that there's a voice on the tape, but now is this a hoax or not? Because you still don't know unless you've done it yourself. So, okay, so there we go.
Yeah. Amber said you crushed her dreams.
You crushed her dreams. Everyone wants Brandon EVPs.
Now let's go back to this. All right. Let's go back to the sanatorium and somebody whisper in my ear. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's what you want. Yeah.
Well, Brandon, I think your day is coming soon where you're going to have something happen. And then you'll have to come back and tell us what it is.
Yeah, if you do, you have to message us on the X or whatever it's called.
Yeah, totally. You'll be hearing about it.
Awesome. We have one other thing to do before we kick out of here tonight, and that is the giveaway that we did for the podcast, for all the reviews for the podcast and subscribing over YouTube and all that stuff. So we have our merry band of listeners who have done what they needed to do over in Discord. So I am going to switch over to the desktop scene really quickly.
Did you find the wheel of names?
Yes, and it is all set up. Okay. So I am getting ready.
Look at you.
I am ready to spin the wheel. This will be my first time here. So we're going to spin the wheel.
See what my life's like, spinning the wheels.
And we have Loose. Void Cat Loose.
Loose
are the winner.
Their second piece of Witching Hours merch.
Yes.
Congratulations, Loose. Woo.
So there we go. So hit us up on Discord, send me a message or whatever. I think we already have your address from the last time you won. But you can pick out anything on the merch store: hoodie, hat, coffee mugs, tumblers, whatever. Go over there. Let us know what you want, and if your sizes, colors, all those things, and we will get that into the mail for you.
Yay!
All right, excellent. And thank you everyone for participating. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much to one and all of you. Hang around, Brandon. We'll talk to you for a second as soon as we get off of here. We'll do our little finish here for our live viewers, for our ones who are listening on podcasts. And thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you all next time.